All right, so we're off. So thanks for joining this call, the Azure Intelligent Edge Brief. I'm Kevin Sullivan. I'm a global black belt on our Intelligent Edge team. So what that means is I and my team focus on things that are within our edge space. So for those new to the call, you'll find out very rapidly what that is. For those that are not, you know what that typically means. That's usually Azure Stack stuff, maybe a little bit of IoT stuff and some other things in between. So we'll do the usual simple agenda. We'll go over just the overview of the call, a couple short news things that have happened here in the last couple of weeks. I'm going to do this call, a review of all of the exciting things that happened specifically around our edge space announcements, specifically around Ignite. So Ignite happened the first week of November of this month, and with it, as always, there's typically a flurry of activity and announcements, and this was no exception. So the intelligent edge space, and specifically the products and the solutions that we offer in that space, had a lot of exciting things to talk about. So what I want to try to do today is not just give you what you can get from all the marketing that's out there. I try to dissolve that from a technical perspective and give my view of what was announced and tactically what's there ready to for people to consume, to learn about, and a little bit of commentary on where it looks like it's going, at least from specifically in around the edge space. So first, to get started again, while we're here, this is a call. It's open to everybody. I keep these things as strictly as I can to a 30-minute window, and I think I need to mute something. Marcus, I muted you. I think, I was getting a little feedback. So the 30-minute call, we do not share NDA information, simply because I want to keep this call literally open to everybody on the planet that wants to join, partners, customers, internal, external, don't matter. In fact, I encourage everybody that's interested in the intelligent edge space to join this call, but therefore no NDA sharing. So may have to defer questions if we get some of those. We are using regular Teams for now, so please mute your phone. Looks like we got a fairly small group today, but I'll take Q&A as it comes. But probably the best thing to do is to use the IM window, and folks on my team that are also in this call will help me as I'm talking and maybe type some responses to you quicker than I can get to them at the end, but I'll try to leave time at the end as well. So a couple of quick things of news. The whole topic today is to talk about the news, really, from what happened at Ignite and where we're at with all the new things that happened. I'm trying to dissolve that for you as it pertains specifically to the edge space. But a couple of things to keep in mind. Ignite was earlier this month. The cool thing is if you missed it, this link, if you go to /sessions at the My Ignite Tech Community Microsoft Com link, everybody can go in, and most all sessions, even the theater sessions, the big breakout sessions, and most of the slide decks are available for anyone and everyone to consume. So you can go out there, search for things, and look for that. The other bit of news, I was waiting myself. I was thinking the other day, it's like, man, where's 1910? Well, it actually, as soon as I hit the refresh page, I saw it go from 1908 to 1910 sometime yesterday. So it is out today. Release notes are posted, which means if you have an Azure Stack Hub, you should see that in your dashboard notification that it's available. If you have ASDKs running, you can redeploy. You'd have to redeploy, but essentially you should be able to get 1910 from the website now. And again, lots of announcements. That's the focus of this call. So let's go ahead and get started. Before I do that, a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are really the majority of it are from the Ignite sessions. One of my colleagues put this nice slide together, which basically says here are the main sessions. And so from an edge platform perspective, as well as from an Azure Arc perspective, and we'll talk about Arc here for those that don't know what Arc is or why we're talking about it in this call, but essentially those are very timely as well, and also very related to our edge space now and in moving forward, and some exciting things that happen in that space. But if you get this slide deck, there are the links. Very easy just to go straight to those My Ignite sessions and review that content. Okay, so I've used this slide, this infamous slide, and others have used it for a long time. We're about to put it to rest, or rather evolve it because of the new announcements. But again, just to kind of give us a look at what we focus on, or what we have been focusing on, which is going to change a little bit as we move forward, and I'll explain that here in a second. But yes, we still have these two edge things that we tend to focus on, particularly for this specific call in my team when we go out to talk to customers about using things from the edge from Microsoft, and that's what was formerly Azure Data Box Edge and what was formerly Azure Stack, and these represent two solutions, hardware solutions, to address some of the edge compute needs and some of the edge use cases we have from an Azure perspective. So jumping in, and what it's now kind of evolving to is, yep, we still have Azure Stack, and so Azure Stack represents a family, and in that family we had a few name changes. In short, Azure Stack, or what was formerly known as Azure Stack, is now called Azure Stack Hub. So we changed the name to reflect the OEM supplied appliance, the 4 to 16 node, what we call scale units that make up Azure Stack, those are now referred to as Azure Stack Hub units. And we also have Azure Stack Edge, which was formerly DataBox Edge. And so we'll talk about those are part of that integrated systems, that Azure Stack family. Azure Arc is something that has been around, and if you may have seen bits and pieces of this being talked about here and there out in the public, out in the world. Well, we went official with what Arc is, or rather some really three things which we're looking to deliver. One of those things already in public preview, and the other one's coming very soon. What that actually is. So what I want to do is I want to distill both all the announcements and all the cool things that have happened in the Azure Stack perspective, so specifically around Azure Stack Hub as well as Azure Stack Edge, and then also talk about Arc, and then bring that together from, okay, well, why does it make sense for these things to come together, and it'll hopefully come clear as we go along. So let's start with the Azure Stack family now. And so again, Azure Stack Hub and Azure Stack Edge. And so, yes, I'm probably going to be guilty of still saying Azure Stack or saying DataBox Edge, but these are the new names. So starting with Azure Stack is now Azure Stack Hub, and Azure Stack Edge was formerly DataBox Edge. So starting with Azure Stack Hub, this is a very familiar slide to a lot of you. The various features that have been available and you can use now in an Azure Stack Hub environment are absolutely there, such as compute network and storage for virtual machines, being able to do Key Vault, being able to do database as a service, service fabric, etc. We've had a lot of these things on the in development perspective, but at Ignite, we actually started putting some timelines down for when to expect some previews. And there are some new things. So API management has always not really been talked about as in development. Well, it absolutely is. And we have previews that we've stated that will be coming early 2020. So early calendar year 2020, we expect a preview. And you'll see a general theme. The early calendar year 2020 is going to be a big quarter for us from a edge perspective, because a lot of these things have some dates around them. IoT Hub, I just want to delineate. So event hubs, we have previews coming. IoT Hub is absolutely still on the roadmap, but we have not yet committed for the re-release of this preview. For those of you that go back more than a year with Azure Stack, now Azure Stack Hub, remember that we did have a release of both the IoT Hub and the Event Hub preview, and we pulled that back because they wanted to rework it for some pretty major changes they were making both to those services as well as to the Azure Stack stuff itself. And so we're re-releasing the preview. Event Hubs has a date, early calendar year. We're still to be decided. IoT Hub, just want to make sure we understand, is absolutely still on roadmap. And then again, we'll talk about Azure Arc here separately, but again, and how that plays with Azure Stack Hub as well as other things. And then we have Stream Analytics. So Stream Analytics, again, starting from a preview, early calendar year 2020 was announced as well at Ignite. And then there was other things. So Kubernetes engine has been around. It's been in preview for a while now, as of build 1910. So again, the Azure Stack Hub build that just dropped yesterday, we are now GA. So if you are a 1910 build Azure Stack Hub and you want to take advantage and deploy Kubernetes clusters using the template out there with that is that is AKS engine powered. That is now a generally available thing, not just a preview. So that's important to realize and know. We did also announce some hardware things coming, specifically some GPUs that we're looking to bring to market with Azure Stack Hub options, again, starting early calendar year, et cetera. And then again, one thing that I didn't have on that slide because I just didn't have the icon for it, and this is interesting too, this was really news to me, Windows Virtual Desktop. We also announced that will be released in a preview form to an Azure Stack Hub environment. And I believe the plan is to essentially have the control plane within Azure Public, but then have the ability to deploy Windows Virtual Desktop to an Azure Stack Hub environment for virtual desktops for VDI type of scenarios. So that was a lot of information, a long list of features, and I just wanted to make sure those were coming, and we've started putting some dates and names and dates together from an Azure Stack Hub perspective, and we'll come back around to these here in a second. But then I want to shift over to what we've done with Azure Stack Edge, formerly DataBox Edge. And so Azure Stack Edge, as those that you don't know, this is a 1U node appliance that you can order up right from your Azure subscription. And then what happens is we ship you this device. This device comes with 20 cores, 128 gig of RAM, and also an onboard FPGA, which makes it a very attractive and powerful compute device for inferencing things, right? So video inferencing or machine learning, AI type modeling, processing of data at your edge location where you need it. So a couple of things in stars, and we'll talk a little bit about this, and a couple of announcements. So we've announced that previews are coming early next year for bringing NVIDIA GPUs to the Azure Stack Edge appliance. So you'll have those options. But we also made some very interesting options around the compute itself. Today, it's just Linux-based container compute. Early next year, we'll start previews around being able to actually deploy and manage virtual machines from Azure to Azure Stack Edge, along with that containerized compute. And the containerized compute gets better because then we'll have the option to have AKS managed Kubernetes clusters as well sitting on Azure Stack Edge. And so, again, they're coming soon. I've been fairly animate and checking in with certain people on the product group saying, hey, is there anything you can get me in earlier? And unfortunately, there is not. But they are coming. And so it's already a very good and awesome IoT Edge device, but coming soon we'll also be able to make it into a Kubernetes device as well as VMs. Virtual machines is interesting. Pretty straightforward, right? It's the ability to run virtual machines, and why not? Underneath the covers on that Azure Stack Edge is Windows abstracted from you, but running Hyper-V, and so we absolutely have that capability. But I think virtual machines, bringing those to that device as well as what's already there with containerized compute, opens the door to expands the door to a lot of scenarios that people don't think of Azure Stack Edge today for. So yes, I could use it for generalized compute as well as inferencing, or maybe a combination of both. And so I think that's an interesting story to tell. And you couple that with the fact that we can bring, or will be also bringing, Kubernetes to that as well. So again, being able to deploy and provision an AKS managed Kubernetes cluster to Azure Stack Edge is a powerful thing. And then you'll see some calls, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, where this thing called Azure Arc also starts to kind of get into the mix as far as Kubernetes on that device, as well as those virtual machines on the device, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. And then, of course, since we're bringing clusters, and also if you're going to use it for a more general compute device, and with VMs, of course, we probably care about resiliency and clustering. So we're bringing clustering, and what we're talking about is the physical clustering of more than one Azure Stack Edge. So two Azure Stack Edges, or 3 or 4 Azure Stack Edges working within a cluster. And again, treating it as an orderable appliance, the same way we do it today, right? It's just an Azure asset that I order up, I start paying for once I activate and confirm that I have it in my possession, bringing cluster to it. So one is resiliency and high availability. The other one is maybe I've got workloads that need to go and expand beyond the number of cores and the GPUs or FPGAs I have in there. we'll be able to do that as well. Again, coming soon. I just want to note that these are parallel things. A lot of these aren't really waiting on one for the other. They are happening in parallel, but once they all hit preview, they absolutely will play off of each other and make a more powerful set of value as well as options, and again, I think expand the scenarios quite a deal versus what formerly DataBox Edge, now Azure Stack Edge, have been used for. So a couple things, the difference between what we found is there's a lot of, FPGAs are great. If you use Azure Machine Learning, our tools are kind of embedded. It's real easy to build models that are FPGA centric and take advantage of it. But there's a lot of people that don't. So if you're using other things, Azure ML as well, but Onyx, NVIDIA, EGX, DeepStream, TensorFlow, those types of things, that will be an option because, again, GPUs will be an option for that as well. And then to sum up here from an Azure Stack Edge perspective, there are, on top of all of this, there are other form factors to also keep your eye on that were announced. So the product group is calling what they call a commercial series set of options around Azure Stack Edge, as well as a ruggedized series around Azure Stack Edge. And so on the left, we'll still have a 1U. Today, that's 20 core, 128 gig, 12 terabytes of RAM. And will those specs, may they change? Well, sure, they might, but we can only talk about what we know today. So we'll have a more server class-like commercial device. Maybe the one on the left is the FPGA version. Maybe the one on the right is GPU version. We'll have those choices. But we'll also have ruggedized. So think taking that server class device with with all those core and maybe GPU or FPGA, because I need to put these where I need to bring some shock absorption. I need to encase them to protect from the elements. And if you look really closely at the pictures, they have batteries on them. So even to run for a period of time without power is something else that we're bringing to both the big commercial Azure Stack Edge and the rugged version. But then we also, and we talked a little bit about this, a sneak peek of this even prior to Ignite, bringing out a prototype around what I'll call the backpack version. So a human carryable battery driven Azure Stack Edge as well. The important thing to note here is they're Azure Stack Edges. So as far as features and functionality, today Linux-based containers, tomorrow Linux-based containers, VMs, Kubernetes, etc. It's a consistent platform across any and all of these different options. So again, something to keep your eye on. The specs and how long batteries will last and what will exactly be in this backpack version, et cetera. That still remains to be seen, but it's coming soon. Okay. Oh, and then there are some AKA links here, and I put these in there, so I'll post these on the GitHub site, but to get these. But if you can remember, aka.ms. Stack Edge previews and Azure Stack Edge. I believe at the moment these are more interest forms. So hey, here, give me your contact information if you want us to email you when things develop. The previews are to be started in really early January. Would probably be the earliest you'll see any of these actually form up. Just FYI. All right. So with the time remaining, I want to go over what Azure Arc, what it is, and that type of thing. So if you go out and you look at the website for Azure Arc, or if you go to and you pay attention to the first 5 minutes of some of the Ignite sessions on Azure Arc, it's essentially the any cloud, any infrastructure management plane that I can bring to anywhere. Well, what does that mean? Well, I'm going to kind of distill it, what was announced and the reality of the things that make up Azure Arc, or at least the one thing that is here today in a public preview and the other two that are soon to come out as a public preview. So essentially, there are three things that are worth focusing on and looking at from an Arc perspective. There's what I'll call Azure Arc for servers. So the ability to essentially bring and manage any Windows, any Linux server, regardless if it's bare metal, it'd be a VMware VM or running an AWS or even wherever it needs to run, and bringing a management plane, a governance management plane within Azure via the Azure Arc architecture. So that's number one. The second one is Azure Arc for Kubernetes. And so essentially doing that, or doing what we can for just individual servers wherever they may live, doing that same thing for Kubernetes clusters wherever they may live. And then the third thing is you'll see in sessions that were announced and some preliminary demos, and again public previews coming soon, this Azure Arc for data services. Now, what's interesting about this is I think the most key interesting one, and Azure Arc for data services is something that will anchor into, or rather exploit or leverage, Azure Arc for Kubernetes clusters. And I'll explain here as we go what I mean by that. So let's just take a step back and look at this. So Azure Arc for servers. So again, there's three things: Azure Arc for servers that was talked about and shown at Ignite. There's Azure Arc for Kubernetes, and there's Azure Arc for data services. So Azure Arc for servers is actually, if you haven't already, if you have access to Azure, an Azure subscription, you can sign up and load this. Load this now. So this is in public preview. So now there's this new thing in your Azure blade here called Azure Arc. And this new thing is essentially how we can bring or manipulate and manage Azure Arc for servers. Note that there's signups for the other two, Kubernetes and as well as data services, and that will basically put you on the list to be notified when those things are available. But today I can easily bring this in. So I just want to give you a little demo of what this is. Well, what is it and what is it not? So what it is a way to take any existing server, wherever it might be, assuming that it has a line of sight to the internet and therefore Azure, a way to bring some governance, some control, and management of those servers into Azure as a central control plane. So in my environment, I've got two servers. How I got there is when you add a server today, the experience is pretty simple. You essentially create one or more resource groups. You tag it into a region to where to send the data for management. And then depending on which flavor of operating system, it essentially will generate the scripts that you can automate or manually install. So yes, there is an agent that gets dropped down on your Windows server or Linux. In the preview right now, it's fairly limited Linux distro. I believe it's just Ubuntu 16.04 and up, I think. And then for Windows is 2012, and I'm sure they'll expand that once we evolve through the preview. But once I have that, so what is it good for? Well, if I go in here, you'll notice that it brings it in as a true, honest Azure resource, just like an Azure VM or a website or a Kubernetes cluster. And so when I have this, the nice thing about this is, at least in the initial preview, is I can do things such as tag the data. So I can apply the same tags I can to my other Azure assets I have in Azure. But again, these could be anywhere. They could be even in AWS if you wanted to, and bring them in. And also, you have RBAC. So I can essentially role-based assign roles to these Windows Linux servers, which can be anywhere. So that's pretty nifty. So I can give only the groups of people within Azure to their credential. They can essentially manipulate or not see these other things, in this case servers. But where it gets powerful is this. We're introducing the ability to apply in the near future, not right now, but as we progress, the ability to also enforce policy. The same policies that we already have for governance and Azure policies for virtual machines in Azure today. There's really not any difference. So essentially, if I want a policy for Windows devices that, I've got strong local admin passwords, or only certain groups should be in an administrative account, I can apply, audit those, and/or in the near future remediate them, just like I can alongside my Azure resources as well. And of course, also plumbing it up to what we've already able to do, maybe log analytics, monitoring, change configuration management, all of these things, bringing that together from that perspective as well. But the big deal is Azure Arc brings these in as actual Azure resources versus just this, kind of other thing, right? It's actually an ARM. I can use the whole power of ARM and RBAC and policy, et cetera, to control and manage and manipulate these servers. All right. So a couple of things on the other two. So that's Azure Arc for servers, both Windows servers and Linux VMs, and that preview is out right now and available right now today. Okay, so the next two, unfortunately, I'm still waiting myself to get access. They showed some of this in action at Ignite, but I'm not personally don't have access to what they showed. There are some pretty good actual demos they showed during those sessions that we have links to. But just to talk through these, what these are, and I think is equally important is what they aren't. So the next one is Azure Arc for Kubernetes. So again, just like for servers, we're bringing central management, so policy management. So clusters, at Kubernetes clusters, we need governance and policy around that, just like we would with servers. And so that's what we're bringing with Azure Arc for Kubernetes. But we're also bringing some more native things to it to better manage, just because they're Kubernetes clusters. Basically, any Kubernetes cluster, regardless of where it's at, regardless of how it was provisioned, and I'll come back to that, but it could be an EKS cluster. It could be sitting in AWS. It could be just something I built on-prem somewhere. Again, if that cluster has line of sight to the internet, therefore Azure, I can bring that into my control plane with everything else I'm doing, in this case, into Azure. And so, when we look at the life cycle of this thing, what Azure Arc does is essentially allows you to manage and apply and enforce configurations, right? So if you use, using the GitOps tools, we can apply policies and even remediate and enforce and make sure that certain configurations are deployed and enforced on certain clusters. Again, Kubernetes clusters that may exist even in Azure itself, but may exist anywhere else on the planet, assuming that they have a line of sight and they can talk and send information and telemetry up to Azure. I highlighted these 2 bullet points because this drives the point home, and I want to make sure we're interested. We understand what Azure Arc is, but also more importantly, what it is not. So again, it brings you pane of glass management at scale, multi-cluster. It is not a replacement for, but it is a work with and make things better, like GitOps enforcement and configuration enforcement, as well as making sure you're deploying only approved applications, those types of things in those Kubernetes clusters wherever they may exist. What it isn't is cluster provisioning. This would not replace your tool like AKS in Azure or EKS in AWS, or build, DIY your own Kubernetes cluster. Those tools absolutely are still something that are relevant and needed, but with layer on top Azure Arc for Kubernetes, once provisioned, we can bring the management and control plane aspects to that as well. Another way of saying that is because a lot of people, and the reason I bring this home is, well, does this replace all the Azure AKS engine stuff within Azure Stack Hub that just went GA? Or does it replace the work that we're doing with Azure Stack Edge, bringing Kubernetes deployment? And it doesn't, because those are provisioning engines, and we'll have AKS from an Azure perspective as kind of the management control plane. Azure Arc for Kubernetes will fill in the blanks once provision is done. So again, just want to make that particular distinction. And then finally, Azure Arc Data Services. So the third of the things to pay attention to, look for in the Azure Arc realm from a preview perspective is Azure Data Services. And I think, at this point, this is where it gets real, in the sense that this is where it gets really powerful. So recall that I said that this Azure Arc for Data Services builds on top of or leverages Azure Arc Kubernetes. And here's why. So down below, we're talking about taking the Azure Data Services. So initially in the preview, when it comes out, we'll focus on 2 of them. SQL MI, managed instances, PostgreSQL. So those are 2. The only way to do that in Azure is to do that in Azure. I deploy those to an Azure region, I put them in a resource group, and that's where they live and breathe, and that's how I can scale them and patch them, etc. It's a full-on PaaS service. Well, what we're talking about here is any hardware, any Kubernetes, and how we do that is the assumption is that any hardware and any Kubernetes is now under the management of Azure Arc for Kubernetes. Now I can layer on top Azure Arc for Data Services, and I can bring that PaaS service literally anywhere outside of Azure that I so choose, even into another cloud like AWS or Google, on-prem, etc., or Azure Stack Hub, or Azure Stack Edge, for example. And you get all of the things you would expect from a PaaS service. We do the automation of the updates. We have scaling bars, just like as if it were running within Azure. It just happens to not be. Azure Arc for Data Services will bring that to the surface for those to basically have an elastic, fully PaaS managed data service down to that Kubernetes cluster, assuming that it's Azure Arc for Kubernetes, truly anywhere. And so another way to look at it is this way, and this was helpful for me and this was taken from a couple of the sessions at Ignite. So any hardware is truly anything. It doesn't matter, but what does matter is the assumption is we are talking about Kubernetes and Kubernetes under Azure Arc management. We then layer on top the Azure Arc management, and so the data services management will bring this piece and all the HADR, the scaling, all of the features that we can use, and then that's where we can, starting with SQL and PostgreSQL, bring those as true PaaS services truly anywhere outside of Azure that we so choose. And so the last thing I'll share with you is this, and this is a breakdown of how we're doing this, and just to give you a sense of why this is important, and also it points to what we might have cooking for even future services. Notice that we are bringing Azure Arc in, or how we brought it in is how we brought really everything to Azure, and that is it's a resource provider. So when they bring today, when you do Azure Arc for Server, you've got a resource provider for that. That's in public preview right now. When the public preview goes for the other two, we'll bring in a separate resource provider for Kubernetes and one for the data services. And the nice thing is that, again, this on the right here, this customer location concept, notice that on the far right, we're not trying to replace tools. Certainly for servers, we would use the same server admin tools that, depending on what those servers are, Windows or Linux, or what we're using them for. Same with Kubernetes, same with maybe Azure Data Studio as a tool that I can use against my SQL or Postgres instance that I punch up. But here's where it gets interesting. Wave one would denote that we're not stopping there. And the way we've built this is that it's like Legos. It's modular in the fact that Azure Data Services is going to be the first thing, but most certainly and most likely won't be the last thing. And so how can we bring other PaaS services that we enjoy in Azure services, but bring that, all of the stuff such as operational billing of those services, as well as care and feeding and patching and automation of scaling them, and all of the stuff that from an infrastructure perspective is just really complicated in most instances. It'll be through this Arc framework. And so it's important that we lay the foundation down for servers, Arc for servers and Arc for Kubernetes, but that provides us the foundation to layer on the really interesting things, which is Azure for Data Services, and then whatever we decide to do what's next and expand that portfolio. And again, bringing that back to Azure, will it be better together with Azure Stack Edge and Azure Stack Hub? It absolutely will. And I believe that's an awesome direction to have. And the nice thing is it democratizes in a way, because we don't necessarily even need Azure Stack. I would love you to have it and use it, because I think it's very compelling, and for on-prem, it's the best way to go. But even if you don't, we still have Arc, which can be a very powerful thing just by itself. All right, I went way over time. I apologize. I don't know if there were any questions and stuff. I don't see anything in there. If you guys have any questions, I can hang out for another minute or two. The only thing I had left was when our next call will be, and that is going to be, unlike last time where I skipped it for Ignite, we will have our next call on a week from Friday, which I believe is December 6th, same time, 11 a.m. Central. And be sure to check out the topics link to see what that topic is, which is still to be determined. Thanks, everybody.